All right, let's dive right into this explainer and deconstruct how Anthropic achieves something that is, honestly, truly staggering. We are talking about a projected $47 billion revenue run rate by mid-2026. This isn't just another story about a company building good software. It's an absolute masterclass in shifting user psychology, hyperscaling infrastructure, and literally rewriting the rules of how software is monetized today.
So right out of the gate, we have to look at the monumental challenge Anthropic was up against. I mean, how on earth do you convince value-conscious users, especially in emerging economies where digital piracy and open-source workarounds are just deeply, deeply ingrained in the culture, to consistently pull out their credit cards and pay for a premium software subscription every single month? Historically, direct consumer monetization in these regions has been notoriously difficult.
Well, get this. Brilliantly, India has somehow become the second largest consumer market for Claude globally, bringing in 5.8% of their total traffic. And these aren't just casual users lightly kicking the tires on the tech. This cohort ranks in the top 10% globally for output complexity. They are highly sophisticated power users. So how exactly did Anthropic convert this famously subscription-averse demographic into a massive base of paying customers?
To figure out how they pulled off this impossible business result, we're going to break this explainer down into 5 key parts. We'll start with cracking a subscription-averse market, then explore the cloud capital loop, followed by bypassing local payment friction. After that, we'll look at how they use safety as a trust shield, and finally, we'll dive deep into the psychology of AI lock-in.
Okay, Part 1. Cracking a subscription-averse market.
Notice the intense geographic concentration of technical power users here. The adoption is heavily clustered right in India's prominent tech hubs, places like Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, and Karnataka. We're talking about professional developers, engineers, and freelancers who increasingly view this tool not as some fancy luxury, but as an absolute, non-negotiable utility for their global client work. The return on investment for their daily throughput is just massive.
But you might be wondering, why aren't they just pirating it? Well, think about traditional software. It runs locally on your machine, which makes it super vulnerable to keygens and cracks. Anthropic basically engineered a complete value inversion. The core value, the actual multi-billion parameter model, lives securely inside massive cloud data centers. You literally can't crack an API endpoint. And if you try to run an open source alternative locally, the hardware cost alone is astronomically higher than just paying the $20 a month. By shifting the architecture entirely to the cloud, Anthropic successfully starved the traditional piracy ecosystem.
Which brings us right to Part 2, the cloud capital loop.
To host these uncrackable, hyper-intelligent models, Anthropic couldn't just rent a few servers on the weekend. They had to engineer a hyperscale backlog model, structurally embedding themselves into the world's largest data centers through this incredible reciprocal capital loop. I mean, look at these staggering numbers. A $100 billion commitment with AWS over 10 years and $200 billion with Google Cloud over 5 years. By locking in this kind of massive infrastructure, Anthropic commits to using custom silicon like AWS Trainium and Google TPUs. This diversification aggressively drives down their cost per token, which lets them heavily subsidize usage, undercut their competitors, and natively embed Claude directly into enterprise cloud networks.
Moving on to Part 3, bypassing local payment friction.
Okay, so even with this uncrackable infrastructure and a really hungry developer market, Anthropic still had to solve the localized billing friction that notoriously kills SaaS conversions in emerging economies. If you use a standard web checkout in India, a $20 subscription gets hit with bank, Forex fees, and a mandatory 18% tax. That pushes the cost well over 2,200 rupees. Plus, standard web checkouts there often decline local payment methods anyway. So, Anthropic's solution? An absolutely ingenious mobile app workaround. By routing subscription through the Google Play and Apple App Stores, they unlocked a flat rate price of 1,999 rupees and seamlessly tapped into massive local payment networks like UPI. They basically transformed an expensive, friction-heavy foreign transaction into a seamlessly accessible local utility bill.
All right, Part 4, Safety as a Trust Shield. Now, to win over those massive global corporations, Anthropic had to flip the narrative of scary AI and strict safety guardrails into a highly effective enterprise marketing tool. The foundation of this whole strategy is constitutional AI. Rather than just paying lip service to the idea of alignment, Anthropic relies on a codified constitution, drawing from international declarations and their own internal principles that the model actually uses to critique its own outputs. They even open source this governance structure under a Creative Commons license. And this isn't just about ethics, folks. It is a calculated strategic move to comply with strict global frameworks like the EU AI Act and HIPAA. This predictable self-evaluation loop acts as an enterprise-grade trust shield. In highly regulated sectors, think finance or healthcare, traditional reinforcement learning models are super prone to unpredictable shifts. But this loop right here, it reassures general counsels and compliance officers that the model will literally catch its own mistakes and won't generate non-compliant, biased, or legally violating material. It makes the model fundamentally safe to deploy at a massive scale.
But here's the catch. Anthropic still has to prove they have the smartest models on the market, which brings us to their brilliant capability signaling strategy. By heavily publicizing the terrifying, superhuman cyber-offensive capabilities of their restricted Mythos model, like autonomous zero-day detection and a 72% exploit conversion rate, they signal unmatched technical prowess. They're basically proving their engineers have achieved frontier breakthroughs, and that flex drives corporate clients right to trusting and purchasing their safely bound commercial models like Opus.
And all that deep-rooted enterprise trust? It allowed them to establish massive distribution networks. A prime example is their partnership with Tata Consultancy Services. TCS acquired enterprise licenses to equip 50,000 engineers with Claude, completely bypassing consumer payment barriers altogether. So as these developers build systems for global Fortune 500 clients, Claude becomes deeply, permanently embedded in corporate workflows worldwide. They effectively turned a tough market into a guaranteed, highly lucrative revenue engine.
Finally, part 5, the really fascinating stuff, the psychology of AI lock-in. Because beyond all the massive infrastructure deals, we've got to talk about the actual human neurobiology driving developers to become completely dependent on these tools. It all starts with a dopamine loop, resulting in what neuroscientists call competence addiction. Think about a slot machine. It pays out maybe 5% of the time, right? But generative AI coding assistants, they hit a successful execution rate of over 80%. Because the tool delivers highly complex cognitive outputs at literal hypervelocity, users experience a massive dopamine prediction error. They feel this addictive high, suddenly perceiving themselves as the absolute most capable 10x version of themselves.
And then you stack the IKEA effect on top of that. We've seen this in physical products for years, but it applies powerfully to non-physical workspaces, like Claude artifacts. When developers and designers are wrestling with complex prompts, adjusting layouts, and refining code, they are investing serious cognitive labor. Because Claude ensures a polished final output, this labor creates a really powerful sense of psychological ownership. Users genuinely feel they are paying the subscription to maintain and protect their own cognitive equity, not just renting a piece of software.
Now, this leads to a wild social dimension called hyperactive agency detection, or HAD. Claude uses first-person pronouns, it expresses uncertainty, and it infers intent so incredibly well that our brains subconsciously trigger this evolutionary survival mechanism. We literally start mentalizing the AI as a conscious collaborator. We form parasocial relationships with it, and suddenly, the cold, transactional logic of canceling a software subscription is replaced by a subconscious psychological resistance to firing a highly empathetic coworker. It's crazy, but it works.
So you might be thinking, hey, why not just run a really capable open source model locally? Well, look at the math. The financial cost of a high-end local setup is virtually identical to a 5-year Claude Pro subscription. The true lock-in isn't actually financial at all. It's functional and psychological. Local models basically operate as amnesic blank slates every time you boot them up. Claude Pro offers persistent memory, global project buffers, and models that actively challenge your assumptions and manage dozens of constraints simultaneously.
But yeah, there is absolutely a dark side to all of this lock-in. The shift toward what people are calling vibe coding, where developers just orchestrate AI outputs rather than writing raw code themselves, is causing some serious polarization. Despite the immediate, crazy velocity gains that lock software teams into this ecosystem, there is a very real threat of junior developers entirely losing their fundamental system comprehension. And when the generated code inevitably becomes too complex, neither the human nor the AI can easily debug the mess.
This profound reliance brings us to the steroid analogy. In technical circles right now, using an AI like Claude is no longer seen as a fun luxury. It's a mandatory enhancement. Developers are absolutely terrified that if they aren't using it, their peers are, and they'll become obsolete. It creates this intense existential dread, sometimes even called cyberpsychosis, where paying that monthly fee isn't about buying a neat tool anymore. It's entirely about alleviating the panic of falling behind the industry baseline.
So wrapping up this explainer on Anthropic's multi-layered success, from their absolute masterstroke in hyperscale infrastructure to literally hacking the dopamine loops of power users, it really leaves us with a provocative question. When you punch in your credit card details for that next subscription renewal, you have to ask yourself, how much of this dependency is driven by true, practical utility, and how much is just the quiet, lingering fear of your own obsolescence? Definitely something to think about the next time you open a chat window.